Hello. Our next topic can be introduced by talking about the issue of oil spills. Some of you may remember the name Exxon Valdez, a big oil spill along the Pacific coast of North America. Anytime there's an oil spill like that, and there have been others, even bigger ones, it causes tremendous damage and loss of life to sea creatures, fish and birds. And the reason it occurs is because this oil, in large quantities, is being spilled out on the ocean. Now the oil, generally it's crude oil, is crucial for the economy of modern countries. From that crude oil they get gasoline, diesel, even plastics. It's one of the most essential, if not the most essential thing for transport and an economy, a modern economy, to be able to work. And yet when you get too much of it spilt, it causes havoc. It causes big damage in nature. Well, that corresponds to our topic today. Just as crude oil is the main fuel in modern economies, fuel for cars, trucks, and even heating fuel for houses in some cases, the topic that we have today is the main fuel of our body, which is glucose. And if we don't have glucose in our bloodstream, we're going to be dead in a very short time. But when you have too much glucose, that can cause lots of trouble, just like the oil spills. So I'm going to put up here, to start, the name of the problem of having too much glucose. You probably have heard of it. Diabetes. Now, most people don't even add on the second part to the name, which is mellitus. Mellitus means sweet. You know, we're talking about glucose, which is sweet. So this mellitus in Greek or Latin, I think it's Greek, means sweetness, and that's of course what we're talking about. I like looking at the origin of words because it's often enlightening. It gives you an idea of maybe what the old-time doctors thought and how the whole concepts in this disease were thought through. The word diabetes, I looked it up. Where did the word come from? It's in two parts, the word dia, the part dia, and the second part betus. And I looked at those. Dia means through, and you can see that in some English words like diaphragm, which runs through the middle of your trunk, or diameter of a circle, the line that runs through the circle. Betus was the meaning, had the meaning flow. And I thought about that and I said, oh, what does that mean? It doesn't really help me in understanding this sickness that has to do with excess sugar in our body. And I didn't get a clear reason for why it was called diabetes until I thought about the connection with the way old-time doctors diagnosed it. Doctors a couple of centuries ago, and for quite a long time, diagnosed it by a triad of symptoms. A triad is a group of three major symptoms. I'm going to write them out here. Polyuria. In medicine, we love to use Greek words. I don't know that doctors try and make things just more difficult for everyone else, but words run out for describing all the symptoms and diseases, and so we use Greek and Latin. Poly here means many, as it does in many other words. Poly is many, and urea, you can guess that that has to do with urine. So here we're dealing with much urine. The person is having an abnormally large amount of urination. They're losing the water in the body. Here's the second part of the triad that old doctors noticed in these people who had the sugar problem. Polydipsia. I wonder if English-speaking doctors made this one up, because I don't think that was certainly in the Greek language. Polydipsia is talking about dipping into the water bucket. Here in the first one, you're losing a lot of water, and you therefore need to replace it. The person became thirsty, so they dipped a whole lot to drink water to replace the lost water. These two tell you the reason why they called it diabetes. The water would just go through the people. They would drink water, but they'd soon lose it all. They have to drink that much more. The third one doesn't have to do with that issue, and that is poly. Each one of these is a poly, a lot of something. Polyphagia, which is eating a lot. And we'll talk, if I can remember, I'll come back to that and explain it. Now, some people might say, well, polyphagia is because eating a lot is what caused the diabetes. And there's some truth to that. But there is another aspect to it that is perhaps more explanatory as to what's going on in the process of diabetes. So these three big symptoms was the way that old-time doctors were clued in. This person may have a sugar problem. By the way, the urine that came out in large quantities was sweet urine. And old time, and now I'm talking about not just a century or two ago, I'm talking about 2,000 years ago and more, Greek medical writers talked about how they noticed a certain kind of sickness made the people urinate with the urine being sweet because flies would gather there. There's a story that doctors, before they had equipment for measuring the sugar in urine or in blood, that they would actually taste the urine and see whether it was sweet. I don't think I believe that. But doctors had other ways of seeing that sugar was involved, like I just explained, that they noticed that flies would gather where the urine was. But nowadays, we can, of course, check the blood and the urine for having any sugar, and that diagnoses the issue right quick. So we'll take a look at that. We're talking now about blood, or we could say serum glucose. Serum is more the water of the blood with the things that are dissolved in it. But we'll just use the simple term blood glucose, because the kind of sugar is glucose. And this is obtained in all labs. They now quickly can get you a blood sugar, and nowadays many people can get it on their own with the little device, the little glucometer and some strips. They've made it rather cheap in the United States now. Now it's interesting to know what is considered the normal level of glucose in blood, since that's what we're talking here about, being sick from there being too much glucose, and we better know what normals are. Now, before we get into that, we need to think a minute here about the scale, the measuring units in North America versus the measuring units in Europe. Most of the world uses the what the French call the système international, which is millimoles per liter. And so a value of 5, I'll just put here SI, Système International. That would correspond as 5 here, let's say 5.0. In the other units, which are used in North America, I'll put that over here. The North American units are milligrams per deciliter. Deciliter, about half a cup. 5 here corresponds to 90 in these units. So if you want to know what the Americans use as their units, you need to multiply by 18. Or if you want to change the American units to the European units, you have to divide by 18. Let's remember here in the Système International, it's millimoles per liter. Now, what is of interest? To me, it's quite interesting to notice what was considered normal, or is considered normal now, but not only now, but a couple of generations ago. When my dad started working in medicine, they called blood glucose checked in the morning, not after a meal, because of course when you eat, even if it's not sweet food, you're going to raise your blood sugar. You know, starchy food without any sweetness to it, once it's digested some, it's going to raise the blood sugar. So to compare values, you try to do it in what's called the fasting state. You check the blood sugar in the morning before having taken any food or any drink other than water. If you take coffee, even without any milk or sweet, any sugar in the coffee, the caffeine in the coffee puts more glucose from the liver into the blood. So this is first thing in the morning without anything other than water. It's a fasting blood sugar. Back when my dad was starting out, what was considered normal for that fasting blood sugar was 140. When I started working, they changed the value here. They considered 125 as being the upper limit of normal. And later on in my work, I saw that labs put the upper limit of normal at 110. Now these would correspond to, I think over here, this would correspond to about 7.8, and so go on down. When I started work at Uchee Pines, it was around 110, and when I was there, over the years there, it went even lower. It went down to about 100. And so one could ask, why did it keep coming down? Why this change to lower values? Well, the story is this. A person can have values of 140 and even up to 160, 170, and you won't see these problems. The person looks like he's healthy. He walks fine. He gets along in the world that has no symptoms. But the value of blood sugar that runs up in values that are not with symptoms, nevertheless, in time, begin to develop diseases. And doctors notice this. They notice that people with a value of 140 or even 130, they were coming down with major diseases, heart attacks, kidney damage, eye, vision problems, and so on, nerve problems. And so they lowered the level. Like I said, they went down to 125, and then they kept on going further because they saw that even at lower levels, these problems kept occurring. So most labs nowadays give a figure like 99 as the upper limit. and that would correspond to 5.5 in the units used here in Europe. But there is good evidence that it should be even a little bit lower than that. And I put the levels here that I did because it's been clear for a number of years that the labs haven't finished their work of finding the best upper limit. A study was done a number of years ago, about 20 years ago, in which they checked a good number of people, I don't remember how many hundred it was, that they checked the blood sugar on first thing in the morning, a fasting blood sugar, and they gave these people a questionnaire about their health. How many times did they get a cold? How heavy were they? What problems did they have, if they had any, in breathing? How well could they walk or run? And they then compared their answers on that questionnaire to the blood sugar that was obtained in these people in the fasting state. Interesting results. They found that the ones that had the best interview answers, the ones who had no colds, that were energetic, that walked well or ran well, all of those that had the best answers had their fasting blood sugar under 5.0 in the European units or 90 in the North American units. The lab will tell you differently. They'll call it normal up to values here, or some labs maybe even a bit more. But you really should keep in mind that there's good evidence for the right upper limit in fasting to be these numbers: 5.0 in Europe, 90 in North American units. Now that we know that, it's worthwhile to think a little bit about the issue involved in diabetes. So we're going to think of a tiny blood vessel here, a capillary. And here it is running by a cell. Let's put the cell over here. The blood vessel has the little red cells running through it, and we're in the tiniest of the blood vessels, the capillaries. They only have room enough for the red blood cells to go in single file. They can't double up. They can't go abreast. They have to walk single file. They're slowly going through the capillary, and outside the capillary, in the blood, actually between the red cells, is that thing that we call serum or plasma, more accurately. That liquid then has the glucose in it. So here it is, coming from the digestive system, and actually even better stated, the liver, because the liver controls the amount of glucose that's going to be out in the circulation. The liver stores the glucose, and then it lets it out as needed through the day. So here we'll put glucose coming out of the blood vessel. And we're going to put here something like a door on the cell. You know, I think I'm going to draw that a little bit bigger. Let's do it like so. The reason I'm doing things like this is that the glucose, as vital as it is for the functioning of the cells in the body, all the living cells need glucose. That's their fuel. But the glucose does not have automatic entry into the cell. This glucose can come up to the entry of the cell, what's called the cell membrane, and it cannot go through except through a special door. This is giving you an idea of something that probably most people that haven't studied into health sciences are not aware of. Inside the cells of the body, the environment is very different from outside the cells, even though we're inside the body. Outside the cells, it's extracellular fluid. Inside, it's intracellular fluid, and it's very different. Outside the cell, it has plenty of sodium. Remember, sodium is the part of salt that we usually measure more. Inside the cell, you have very little sodium. It's another substance, another ion, a charged ion called potassium that's dominant. And the reason for this separation is so that the certain cells can pass current, can pass a charge. Nerves work by that. Muscles work by that. So the cells are separating the environments inside from the outside. The intracellular fluid has potassium, the extracellular fluid has sodium, and there are other things that are kept separate. Even glucose, the essential nutrient, does not have automatic entry. It can only go in through a special door. And that door has to be opened. It has a lock on it. And that lock has to be opened with a key. The key is called insulin. And I've made the key too big for the lock, but I think you understand the point. This insulin, the key, has to be there or the glucose can't get into the cells. So let's say you have a person who is eating well, so there's lots of glucose in the bloodstream. They cannot get the glucose into the cell because they don't have enough insulin. Now, the person keeps on eating, but the blood, or rather the cells, are not getting the glucose. That is an actual situation that occurs. By the way, that when that is going on, the glucose level outside the cell is going to keep rising. The person is eating, but the glucose is not getting used. It's not getting into the cell. It's not getting burned up. When it gets into the cells, it is processed. It becomes the fuel, and it is actually burned up. It becomes carbon dioxide and is eliminated through the lungs. This problem of not having enough insulin is, in fact, one kind of diabetes. So we're going to put up here insulin, an I for insulin. Low insulin is one kind of diabetes. We're going to abbreviate this, diabetes mellitus, DM. This is called type 1 diabetes. Now, that kind of problem of not having enough insulin is actually not the common kind of diabetes. It does happen in children, and it can happen in older people as well, but it's most famous for occurring in children. We won't get into all the issues involved. There's lots of evidence that it happens because of an allergy to cow's milk in at least some children. But we're going to go ahead with a look at another situation. When you check other people, you find out their blood sugar is high, just like it is in this type 1 diabetes. And then you measure the insulin, and that can be done nowadays. For a number of years, one has been able to measure the insulin that is in a person. And lo and behold, the insulin is high. You got plenty of the key, but for some reason the glucose is collecting outside the cells here, and it's not getting in. What's happening? Well, the key is not working like it should. We could say that the lock, if you want to use figurative language, the lock is rusty. The key can't open the door. The term officially for this is insulin resistance. So in this kind of situation, the insulin is high. This kind of diabetes is called type 2 or adult onset. And this is the situation for maybe 90% of diabetic people that you see. So this is the common type. This one here, the type 2. And that's the one that we're going to mainly discuss about what to do about. Now, a lot of what we've said applies to both type 1 and type 2. But in type 2, the production of insulin has not been damaged. Insulin is produced by the pancreas in the body. And in type 1, it's the pancreas that's been damaged. In type 2, it's another problem that's occurring. We're going to get into the details of that and explain in the next section how this diabetes manifests itself. Goodbye for now.